So thank you all for joining us. I'm Jeff Sweetland. I'm the chair of the session. So I'm Project Director for Housing Festival, also doing a lot of work in and through local government, trying to really look at the pressures that local governments are under in terms of particularly temporary accommodation, but called out social care, special education needs. So that lens kind of brings the crisis very close in terms of we have to find different ways of thinking, conceiving and commissioning services, including housing. Delighted I've got a panel with me today, so Richard, Paul, Zoe and Sarah, I'll let you introduce yourselves in a moment, but if I can just start, the purpose of today is just to reset the grid around what I'm really passionate about, which is systems innovation. And the sort of the premise for me is that the housing crisis, as we understand it, is not about a lack of land or money, it's about a lack of wisdom in the systems that we have created and their inflexibility and their lack of agility to rethink and repurpose. And so we're going to explore as a panel today that lens of what's our journey of innovation. And recognising that all of these innovations actually have to come together. They have to now to sequence and partake. And if you've had a chance to look around the exhibition or if you've been aware of the playbook that we've launched, that's a sort of an idea of stitching some of these other innovations together. So this idea that there are, this ridiculous waste of human and economic resource and TA is just this alarm bell that goes up and says there's something fundamentally wrong about the way we're commissioning services because economically it's not sound and humanly it's barbaric. And so the playbook is exploring this idea, well, if there's plenty of land in public ownership, and we're confident that with even just looking at local government, the core cities, there's plenty of these small brownfield sites that exist. So that land supply, that could be part of the key point. We have land in our control that we can utilise and deploy. If there's a supply chain that wants to build and has a different business model, so Richard Best, Lord Best this morning talked a bit, didn't he, about developers aren't, the PLC developers have got a model, but small sites, focusing on social rent housing, not really their sweet spot. But there is a supply chain, MMC, SME suppliers that can look at standardisation, accelerate build, help sustainability. How do we tap into that supply chain to make it a way to accelerate commissioning homes as social infrastructure? So there is a supply chain. And then there's the economics, and this is where it's fascinating, recognising that the way we look at an individual site, the way that we look at the viability and the way we assess viability in that individual site doesn't really make sense because it's too siloed. So in my work for Bristol City Council, the HRO will say, well, that site's not viable. But I know if I do not build those homes, it's going to cost me £50,000 per home per year to house someone in very poor quality TA. But that doesn't appear on my balance sheet or my viability because the council's got a rule that says, no, we don't include that. And yet it's still the same purse. So viability is broken. And the playbook is stitching some of those elements together and saying, actually, if you reframe just that viability by looking at ways of leasing out land and unlocking private investment through pension funds, which they're keen to do, that we can then invest in that housing, get that housing built. And of course, if I include in that TA loss my viability, then I can build these houses with gold-plated taps and it will still stack up. And planning. How much of this conference is about planning? And I love planners, but I also have a love-hate relationship with planners because all too often there is a silo of thinking there around what's that balance of harm, that subjective element where what about those that we need to advocate for that are most vulnerable? And I love the session yesterday here from Dr. William Bird around this intervention around health and housing. But planning, there's a route through this too. This is about leadership. So there's mechanisms within the NPPF like the local development orders where we can aggregate land. We've been in this room talking about alliancing contracts. We've got legal mechanisms to create that aggregation, to create aggregated de-risk land, to then go to those supply chains with that standardisation of design within an LDO to commission and accelerate. And actually the model for the playbook suggests that this will cost Treasury no additional money because that money is already going out of the public purse. So innovation is this wicked problem that says we've got these wicked challenges that we face. And the danger is we pick up one piece and we go, it's about NMC, or it's about standardisation, or it's about planning reform, or it's about politicians, or it's about leadership. But the problem is it's about all of those things working together. And that's really what we want to just focus on today. So the idea of the panel today is to get a sense of how those innovation journeys can come together and what we can learn, systems thinking, to create better outcomes for planet and people. And what drives me is how we create better systems to really meet the needs of the most vulnerable in our communities. Because actually, ultimately we pay the cost if we don't make society work better for everyone. So, Paul, can I throw to you first to talk a bit about your journey with Rollalong?
Yeah.
MMC supplier. We've got your wonderful example of a house out the front of the building.
You need to encourage people to go out.
Yes, can I encourage you?
No,
yeah. And actually, in fact, you have to. It's part of the mandate today.
It is. Don't get lunch unless you see it.
Yeah.
So my background. So I'm an engineer by trade. So I've done lots of different roles. I've even been a civil servant for some time. So I've been working for Rollalong now over a year. So Rollalong is we've done a really good job in Rollalong of been trading for 93 years, not telling anyone. So we work down in the south coast, delivering thousands of houses, thousands of projects, and not really telling anyone, not venturing out. So times are changing now, we need to do that. So as a MMC supplier, we're Cat 1, so anyone who doesn't know, we deliver buildings in boxes. You know, they come in modules, and we do that. We as an industry have got some really bad press lately. The first thing I sit with people is just face into that and say, well, how do we fix that bad press? Well, we be honest. And we say, we understand why some of these companies have gone wrong or projects didn't deliver. But when I used to work for Toyota, and they had a motto of failing fast. So when we talk about innovation, the thing I encourage people to do is take chances, do stuff, and if it doesn't work, we need to learn from it. So when people say to me, and we meet clients, and they say, well, outside, I mean, while accommodation, they say, oh, we tried this, we did label well, place well, and it didn't work, and we're never going to try that again. Imagine if we did that with car engines or something, we wouldn't have evolved and we wouldn't have done it. So I'm in the basis of, brilliant, let's face into it, it didn't work, but we've learned from that. We've been trading 93 years. We've made lots of mistakes in construction, and anyone who sits around the table and says, it's swimmingly every project perfect, I'm going to say it's most of not telling the truth.
Yeah.
So it's about having that safe space, about encouraging people to not take chances but bring technology in, understand what it means, and then put your hand up and say that didn't work, but we learned. And I think that's the bit where people sometimes are brave to admit, and I might be because I'm northern, but we kind of face into that and be dead honest and say, look, we've made mistakes. When you go around the building that's outside, we built another one, do it different. And I'll happily point them errors out and go, that didn't work in production. Because we make our money in the factory, in the nicest possible way. We don't want to be on construction sites.
Great.
I want to be on an office as quick as I can.
Yeah, great. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, again, picking up what Bess was saying this morning, it all depends on what question you're asking, what problem you're trying to fix. So if you start with a problem that says, as a country, we can't build the number of homes we need to build, then you have to innovate an MMC as part of a diversification of that supply chain, tackling the crisis. Zoe, we've spent the last, I hate to think, a number of years working on a number of projects together, through and in local government. And we've, what's again really encourages me is this is not just talk. So there's a project that we've been working with Atkins Realis in Bristol called Thriving Places, where we're aggregating these small sites, we're commissioning MMC, we've tackled the viability of those zero carbon social rent homes, so we know some of this works. This is how you then bolt the sort of aggregation even bigger and better. And one of the questions we'll be looking at is the sort of innovation journey of that and the digital solutions to help councils be better at understanding their assets and their... So can we talk about that innovation journey and the joy and the pain of some of that?
So my background, as an architect by background, but about 10 years ago I had one of these moments where I retrained around the resilience of urban systems, which really is looking at systems thinking and how you do tackle major problems at pace and scale. And I've had that lived experience, which I suspect many of you in this room have also felt, of the frustration at different points, whether it's commissioning, whether it's how you're procured through government, or the planning process, or getting data out of local councils to do your assessment of the sites. And effectively, I sort of wanted to move us forward to how can we pull together the evidence and interpret that evidence in a way that means you're making decisions upstream with wisdom. And you're making decisions that mean that you're looking at all of the information in one go, in a layered way. So whether that's you're looking at flood risk, air quality, habitat connectivity across the city, you're looking at your health indices and deprivation, you're looking at how mobility works, and you're really looking at what is the land use optimisation, and you're thinking, well, how do I create that stewardship that means land stays with the council, but we make sure that we counter maladaptation, we don't do the wrong things in the wrong place, but also that we deliver. So I'll give an example of sorts of barriers we were facing, and then those sorts of things, how that feeds into thinking about what that tool needs to do. So we'd find pockets of land that might be quite isolated, and the council, the HRA team would say, well, the local people would say, well, we really want to put a little wildlife park in here, because it's not doing anything. And the council would go, no, I might need that one day, so you can't do anything. And it's just crazy. So actually you can do meanwhile use, and the same was happening around meanwhile housing, putting demountable housing systems into plots. Why on earth can't you do it for 10 years? That's a home for 10 years. The other element was, and we've really seen this a lot, haven't we, Jez, around not truly understanding the need that you're addressing, which is there are people living in dire conditions or in temporary accommodation. Also, that's draining this money all the time from the council, and it's pulling on adult child social care services. So the tool is simply an enabling method to bring multiple layers of data together, but help to interpret that data so that you're making the right decisions. And it's robust enough that you haven't got someone acting, as I was mentioning yesterday, as a grand design Kevin MacLeod, going, well, can you tweak this and tweak that? Well, we're delivering homes. We know these products are tried and trusted. They meet all the criteria. You're focusing on the wrong things. You need to be focusing on those things. What I would also say about it is we've been really trying to activate a community of practice. So learning from lots of different MMC providers, because MMC providers, as many of you know, the ideal situation is where you're looking at a plot, there's not a pre-existing planning application that's already got the massing detailed and the typography. Actually, you want a clean sort of sheet in this essence to look at what works for you, and ideally if you're looking at numerous ones. So we've also been innovating around having this community of practice of getting different MMC providers to share different ways that they've overcome all sorts of small little barriers, and they are normally these human barriers or perception issues that actually digital can help cut through and help visualise and challenge and actually put the evidence behind it. It's an enabler, it's not a solution in itself, but it's an enabler as part of the journey.
That's great, Zoe, and we'll make sure we've got time for questions and answers. And I think the other thing about sort of then putting that into the context of sort of systems thinking, systems innovation is that curiosity to always go, well, what did we learn this time that we could do differently? And of course, one of the things I'm so committed about sort of industrialised construction and MMC is it's partly, of course, as a manufacturing process, it will improve. There's this ability to keep learning, right, and to keep improving. And so one of the things we discovered, which won't be surprising in the room around sort of trying to get these small sites through planning was even when we're the council, trying to build council houses with council money, the planning process and the kind of current logic of planning was a barrier to acceleration, to funding, to density, to quality. So if you were thinking systems-wise, that's actually idiocy. I mean, it's just that one part of the machine is creating cost and friction to another part of the machine to create failure. But it's no one's job. Whose job is it to fix that? And we can talk about planning reform, but this is culture. This is actually culture and how to get those different cogs together. So one of the things we started to look at was, well, how would you, if you were a national government, what would you do? But also, Christy, what would you do in local government? Because this is about local leadership with national support. And so we started to explore something called this local development order. And Sarah, who's been working with us as the Housing Festival, helping us pull together, kind of took on the task of looking at, well, what would it take? What's the risk and the opportunity of looking at a local development order as a way of dropping in this ability to really think about acceleration safely? So Sarah, can you talk me through a little bit about that process and the people you've convened with and where we think we are getting to in terms of proposing and pushing for local development orders?
Yeah, sure. I'll give a little background to myself first, just so you know kind of what gives me the authority, I suppose, to talk around planning. So I've been working in and around the planning system for about 16 years now. Until last year, I was Managing Director of the National Planning Portal. So that's a national system that enables the submission of planning applications of all types major infrastructure to councils. It was a great piece of innovation by government back in its day, 2002, so I was also a former civil servant, and then it was privatised in 2015, so that's a whole different story, a different conversation. So I'm not a planner, but I do understand some of the processes and systems around planning, and obviously it's a critical component of this conversation. It's a challenging time for planners. I'm sure everyone in this room has got experience of that. There's real strain on the system in terms of capacity, so particularly local authorities, there aren't enough planners to get through the number of applications that they're processing, or indeed to do all the good sort of proactive spatial planning that planners really want to do. And they're also struggling for resources, so even though planning fees have gone up a huge amount over the last couple of years, that money isn't ring-fenced into planning, so understandably it's being taken out into social care and all sorts of other things. So planning needs to innovate, but it's in quite a difficult place to do that because it hasn't got the capacity to deal with anything other than what's in front of it, really, at the moment. So I would say two things in relation to that support innovation, or should support innovation in the planning system. One is, not surprising given my background, I think there's a huge amount that tech can do to support better efficiencies through the process, but also to really help with engagement in communities, the kind of talk that you talked about in terms of finding and assessing the land and how you plan better. There's great stuff out there that could really help free up some capacity. But the other point that you make is exactly right. It's down to planning policy. And again, planning's suffered a lot through recent years with lots of additional things being layered into the planning system. And so when I hear talk of bold planning reform, I do wince slightly, because what the system doesn't need is more reform. What it needs is actual simplification. And I come from a place, I say, when I was in government, we had lots of planning simplification that just meant more complexity being put into the system. Now, I think we're in a different place now. The government is prioritising the building of this 1.5 million homes, and that is going to require the system to do something differently. We haven't been at that rate of housing since the 1970s, so we can't keep just doing the same things. And they're talking about with the new planning and infrastructure bill coming in theoretically in March, it being more about cutting red tape. So I think that's good, although we always have to be slightly waiting to see the detail in terms of what might come out of that process. But there are some great levers in the planning system as it stands at the moment, and you talked about local development orders. They're not widely used, but they are used. And effectively what it means is that you look at an area, and that could be at one single site, or it could be multiple sites within an area, so it works well on small sites. And the council, either independently or in collaboration and partnership with the developer, can consult on changing the rules within that area. So you could, for example, say that this has to be social rent housing, it has to be particular density or some of the design parameters that go around it. And you go through a consultation process, but you're not doing it for each application, and that's the critical thing. So there's still that requirement in the process for there to be rigour and discussion with communities, and that is done, but it's done differently, and it's done much more efficiently in terms of kind of the scale and pace that we need to achieve. The other thing which is great about local development orders is that it's not just a planning tool. So it forces collaboration and conversation, and that is the beauty of it, actually, more than the efficiency that it brings in the planning process. Because not only does it force those conversations at the council level, because there needs to be the political desire to have this mechanism used, and it has to be looked at in terms of what the council's trying to achieve as well as just the planning teams. But it forces conversations with communities early, much better engagement. It forces conversations early with statutory consultees. So it looks to be a really great opportunity. As you say, I'm not a planner, but what I have been able to do is convene quite a number of planning consultants, planning lawyers around this topic, and people who know the detail of policy much better than I do. and it looks like this is going to be an opportunity to support the work that the Housing Festival is doing. So yeah, it's been fascinating. We're going to cover a bit more in the last session of the day, so if you want to hang around for that, I'd be delighted to see you.
Yeah, great. So thank you for that. And I think again, it's interesting. So we're looking at systems, right? Innovation. How do you realign with the problems you're trying to fix? And so we've got sort of an understanding of supply chain. We've got an understanding of sort of digital and better decision making, right? And the digital age. One of the things we're not short of is data, but how we understand that data, map that data for really good long-term decisions, and then into innovation, into planning. Now, this isn't the full ecosystem, but you can just start to see the levels of complexity that you're trying to align to get this real acceleration. And Richard, coming to you then, what's really important when you're trying to innovate is then not waiting for things to be perfect and complete, but then finding those sort of innovators who are making it work today, which is really around leadership, convening, driving, entrepreneurial, and doing that with partnership, because it's not a silo. So Richard, tell us a bit about your journey and your successes, and perhaps even if you want some your failures, but share a bit about yourself and your journey today.
Thanks, Jez. Fascinating to hear from the other speakers as well. But yeah, it is definitely a system that we operate in. So Cornerstone Place started in 2019, and like many startups, the path wasn't very straight, and obviously 2020 had a special meaning, with COVID. So, but we did start our first projects during COVID, but what we sort of honed in on eventually was that we believe that in delivering this sort of housing, having what we call assets in the hands of the impact makers, so local authorities and asset lot bodies owning those assets will create those perpetual returns that go back into the community rather than it going out. So that was our first kind of innovation, our first thing that we kind of unlocked, and then we recognised that actually partnering with local authorities, who are ultimately the beneficiaries, hopefully by reducing TA and other costs, and using their land to which is often overlooked and underutilised, was a really good tool for kind of unlocking new homes for people who are in housing need. And as discussed, for traditional private sector profit-driven developers, these small sites are not viable, particularly when you're thinking about delivering social homes. Often they're small, they're below 10 units, and normally a developer would say, well, it's below 10 units, if they're only social. We're the exact opposite. We want to do 100% social housing. So we'll be completing 34 net zero homes this year, which is great. We can't wait to open the doors for those. And they're very challenging sites, anything from kind of 2 units up to, I think this one's about 14. But challenging sites, but these are genuinely homes that otherwise wouldn't have been delivered. And it's proof that these small sites can be used to deliver transformative change in these local communities, and using these innovative techniques like MMC and others to try and deliver those. But it is really important to focus on the partnerships. And we're now starting to see growing interest from a number of different local authorities across the country, and hopefully we'll have more to talk about that soon. So our approach is, we think, infinitely scalable on all of these different sites all over the country, working with local authorities, working with the supply chain to unlock these homes, focusing on the areas of need. So don't just build the things that are going to give you the most profit, build the things where the greatest need is. So if that's multi-generational homes, great. If it's things that are DDA compliant, great. It's what the local authority needs, what's going to support those communities. And as Jessica said, there's millions of people in housing need at the moment. There's thousands of sites that are available across the country, albeit difficult and tricky. And there's billions, right, probably trillions, if not, I don't know what the next one is after that, of money that's flowing around looking for a sustainable, impact-driven return. Bringing those things together, it's obvious. But as Jess says, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different things that kind of get in the way, and we just need to work together to make that happen. And we believe that we can easily deliver, not us, but everyone and people copying what we do, 90,000 social homes on these small sites during this bond, for sure. But it's all about, for us, it's collaboration and transparency, being clear about what you're trying to achieve and why, and being really open with your partners. For us, funding has been really important, and working again with local authorities and MHCLG, to utilise the funding streams that are available. So we've used RSAP and SHAP and Towns Fund and Brown Land Release Fund and all of these tools, because actually that's what they're there for, that's what they're there to be used for. and we're delivering high quality NDSS compliant, as many front doors as possible, because that's critically important as well. And for us, if we can do this, we're doing it in Rochdale at a reasonable scale. If we can do this in Rochdale, where there is, relatively low social rents in terms of, the revenue that you can generate from these sites, and still be able to deliver it so that the debt that remains can be serviced by local rents, then we should be able to do it anywhere in the country. Right? Yes, I mean, it's probably one of the lowest rent areas in the country. Right. So, yesterday I understand that someone pointed out that that trainee barristers also need homes, and of course they do. But the market mechanism, I think, can fix that for trainee barristers, and when they're upwardly mobile and they have a stable income, then of course there is an opportunity in the market for them. But what we need to do as a sector, I think, is focus on unlocking the homes that are not being delivered for these people in potentially temporary accommodation or risk of homelessness. And if we can do that together, the whole rest of the market, I hope, will follow. So, it does leave behind the most vulnerable people in society. We think the current market mechanism, and we need to make a change to that now. And I know there's various task and finish groups that are happening at the moment. So, there's a clear path forward, and the challenge for us is not about how. There's a demonstration here of all of the different people and how we work together to deliver these. It's the will, and finding and unlocking that in local authorities and hopefully in central government. And it's time for bold partnerships and leveraging all of the goodwill that exists, but also the track record that different organisations have. And we believe by keeping those assets in community ownership, we'll create these perpetual social returns and help build communities back up again.
Great, thanks, Richard. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, again, spending quite a bit of time working through local government, one of the things you realise is that often local government has no money left. The HRA, in many instances, is sort of maxed out with the LP communities, focusing on decarbonisation, improving existing homes. So the capital's gone because the interest cover ratio is maxed out. And then, of course, it might be the general fund, but the general fund has got adult social care and special education. There's no money left. And so one of the other key parts of this is then how do you really start to unlock that private investment? Because the reality is that the cost of housing people in TA we're paying for. So this is not a new cost, it's just that we're housing people in very expensive, often very poor quality accommodation. And so actually, again, the sort of financial innovation of this is really unlocking that long-term private investment. And as Richard alluded to, the good news is the money is there, it's the mechanisms to create that de-risking for those pension funds, that we can get the de-risk land and we can get the de-risk supply chain and we can accelerate. So this is the innovations thinking. And what strikes me about all of this is, A, the risk of silos, is that these things are worked on in their individuality and they're not stitched together. And then there's the lack of leadership. Because all too often, and I pick up on the questions I asked yesterday around the house, all too often, I think we're asking the wrong question as society. We're fixing the wrong problem. And then we say it's too difficult. And then the politics gets grubby, and the politics gets really hard, and then we give up and we start making excuses. And what I want to be very clear about is that systems innovation is saying, what's the problem we're trying to fix? What's the bits of the machinery that aren't working? Some need to be thrown out, some need redeeming. But they have to work together. And I think that the point of this panel is to show that the collaborative approach, which is working through our individual organisations, but with a real openness to learn, is critical. But there is no excuse. This can be done. Absolutely can be done. And what I think I've learned is that there's a wonderful naivety when you're a child. You think someone knows how the country runs and that someone is in charge. You get older and you realise, actually, no one's really in charge. The wonderful thing about democracy is, technically, we're really capable people. So can we please ensure that we're helping create that movement? Because our leaders are desperate for answers. And they're open. There is a political zeitgeist right now saying, how are we going to fix this? So this innovation journey is not ours, it's ours. It has to be. So we're going to open for Q&A. I'd like any comments from the panel just before we have the Q&A.
Yeah, just one comment. I mean, I like to think in newspaper headlines sometimes, and like, why are we all here and why are we doing this? And I sort of, in my mind, 10 years from now, what do we want featuring in that newspaper headline? It would be that the collective of the community that we've seen here over the last 2 years, the last 2 days, has been fundamentally key in driving that different approach around driving regional programmes, enabling the supply chain, delivering homes, reducing the debt this country has that's linked to tackling health and wellness, but also what that does by us measuring broader value in terms of our houses and what our houses deliver in terms of value to society. It means we generate different funding pathways, but we're also playing back that data to those impact investors, to those pension funds. So that newspaper headline would be saying, gosh, look how Britain has re-engineered itself, look how its prosperity has grown, look at the health of the nation has grown. Oh, and guess what, all of you are then selling globally and internationally because we've got a system, a methodology, and guess what, we are some of the world's best engineers, and we still are brilliant at manufacturing, so we have an opportunity, to be able to export it. We should be going for the Northern Star, and at the moment, we have got that lack of leadership, but it is a moment in time, and it does require this collective action, but that is challenging. Bringing everyone on the journey together is flipping difficult.
Yeah. Did you want to come in, Paul?
Yeah, no, it's just to echo it. I think the bit I always say to people is, it's interesting that Richard doing in Rochdale. So and I always try and champion this. So I'm chairman of a multi-academy trust in Rochdale and Tameside. So Angela Rayner's patch, and she frequently comes into my schools. Encourage people to go and see it, because I took that role 5 years ago. But what it does for me personally is you see the impact of what you do as a day-to-day. So when you see the children that go to some of these deprived areas, you get to a point where you go, right, okay, my kids are really lucky. My kids, and you tend to then socialise with people that and in them circles, go and volunteer in trust or in your local school and see the impact of some of these decisions, because you tend not to see it in your own life, in your working life, in your corporations. So, go and see it, and then you'll be as passionate as we've heard from all the speakers over the last couple of years about making change.
Yeah, right, yeah. Seeing is believing, right?
Definitely.
And just to encourage people as well, this is not just theory, right? I am not interested in more talking. I mean, one of the last things the housing industry needs is more summits and more expos and more talk, right? We are brilliant at analysing problems. What actually we need is delivery and change. And so, this is not about, for me, I mean, I was actually quite frustrated last time. I had a great day, but actually listening to what's going on through MMC Ireland, I'm going, oh my gosh, they're just getting on with it. What is wrong with that? So I'm very impatient for change, but to encourage you, there are discussions happening around some of the playbook and the approach there that are aligning with CLG and going to hopefully into the spending review. These things are not clear cut, are they? There's an art to this that, as I say, way beyond me, but there's a process happening right now. There was a meeting actually 2 weeks ago with Matthew Pennycook looking at this, and he's given us sort of some approval to progress the ideas. So this is not just about talk, it is around how we then carefully and rightly carry on that systems innovation, but to get delivery, because I am not interested in talking, although I do talk a lot. So can we take any Q&A? Any questions for the panel? Yes, Alex.
As someone who has run investment portfolios of all kinds of housing, I think one of the challenges in planning is actually the view of social housing of existing communities and the absolute vehement resistance to it often.
Absolutely.
And actually, in my view, mixed tenure, mixing people is actually the better way to go. But I have a number of experiences of trying to get through consensus and delivering housing where the local absolutely do not want any social housing at all, regardless of the level of support engagement, and lots of negative stereotypes. We all know that they're not fairly there, but for me, that is the bigger problem. How do you think that gets addressed?
So I think in part what we found is you really have to understand your place, and what we found in terms of developing that tool is you're understanding your place and you're understanding your needs. So if you take Bristol, for example, it's really interesting. You can see areas where it's single mums living with their children, that they're grouped together. You can see where the elderly are living. You can see where certain demographics are existing and populating, and you can see where communities will benefit from having greater diversity in terms of the pool of people are there. So I think part is understanding your place and where you're looking to make those interventions, and is the right intervention in the right place. And I think we touched on it yesterday, is building trust is fundamentally important, and I actually think getting that deliberate democracy and early engagement requires significant community participation, and you can't avoid that. And we also know some people are going to be unhappy, but we are going to have to just crack on and do it, unfortunately. But I think, we have to overcome the fear that then means we don't do anything. We do have to just do something. And I think some of that red tape will enable that. I agree with you.
I wonder too as well, it's so thinking about the aggregation of small size, that is actually creating mixed communities, because what we're doing is we're taking bits of land and it's sort of gentle infill, isn't it, really? So these exist within existing communities that are mixed tenure, and they're not overwhelming existing communities. So I think there will be resistance. I think that's inevitable. But I think this is then also about education. The idea that people living in TA are all basically on the dole, benefit sheets, lounging around. There is, and I'm going to be political for a minute here, there is a problem with the narrative the Daily Mail puts out that is misguided around creating this broken reality for people that says people in social housing are just not contributing to society. We had a lady yesterday speaking about her experience who's lived in TA, the impact of that on her children. She works for council and as a consultant. So this is not this. There is the working people amongst us now who are living in TA. So that's the issue, and I think that it's about how we do it wisely. The other thing I just want to say is very clearly this, is that the models we're looking at are around creating the viability that says we'll take 50% of people out of long-term temporary accommodation. That creates the viability, opportunity and revenue. But the other 50%, this is all social rent. This is not proposing for this, although I love the demountable absolutely, it's a both and. But for this, it's long-term social rent housing, and then the other 50% goes to people on the housing waiting list. Now, when you get into planning, those people want homes. So it's also how we get those people to be more engaged in the planning process and the consultation, because all too often, that planning process, those people are either not in the room or they're not advocated for. And that is democratic. There's a democratic deficit in that. So it's leadership, it's the wisdom of the model, it's the gentle infill, the density mix, and then it's ultimately how we educate and get the narrative correct, I think.
And just a couple of points. So I was going to agree with the point around the small sites. Integrating communities does take away a bit of that, but we face a lot of resistance, particularly when you have, local people saying, I don't want these pedos in my back garden, and I've literally seen letters written like that in planning applications. But on one of our sites, it's really, really dense. We're literally building on everything, strip of grass, and it's directly opposite school, and we've had a lot of pushback, pedos, etc., whatever. And it's been a real challenge, and the community have done things like parked cars over drains so we can't access. They've parked over entrances to the site so that we can't access or get the muck out. And it becomes about communication. So we're communicating with all of the local, community groups. The contractor has gone and met with the head teacher at the school across the road and has said, I want to do site visits with the kids and bring the classes in so that we can show them what's happening. And then this particular site is for local people. So it's young people who are at risk of homelessness. It's for them. So you have to be from that area. And I think there's a bit of a communication piece there. And then the registered provider that's going to be, the centre point will be delivering services. When we get closer to finishing off, are going to go around all of the houses and just knock on the doors and have a conversation. So I agree there is that immediate knee-jerk Daily Mail, not in my back garden, but I think through communication and through being really open and transparent, I think there's opportunities to show the value that's going to catch the people in the community that otherwise are going to get put on a train and sent somewhere else.
It's otherwise it's no bigger. It doesn't work. I just find on that, I think because this is really key, isn't it? The whole planning issue. Let's be really clear. A lot of these brownfield sites, they're horrible. So again, when we've done some of these sites in Bristol, actually people have supported the planning application because these are horrible leftover bits of land that are fly tipping sites, etc. So actually, we're tending to find if the community brought with you, they go, "Oh, we'd love some housing there," because right now it's a real horror site. I mean, we've got some of those images in Bristol, haven't we? Of what's there now, and it's just embarrassment. I mean, it's an awful site, blighting the community, creating poverty and a poverty mindset. So it's not binary. It's about the wisdom of the whole thing. Sarah, on the LDO. Can we just be clear? This is also about proper consultation.
It is a proper consultation, and that's Zoe's point really about. If you're going to consult on an area and multiple sites within an area, you need to be very clear which sites you're putting into that package and which you want. So you need to do your risk assessment, if you like, on those sites so that you can understand that they are not going to be right because there will be a reaction from the local community. It's not right in that context, whatever it might be. And so I think, you know, again, because that consultation comes early, it should be a genuine consultation. All too often in planning, unfortunately, consultation comes at the end, and people don't really want to get feedback from the community. They want to tick a box and go into that process. If you do it early and you can really engage the community and get their views on it, then I think you've got the opportunity to influence their housing.
Great.
I think what's also exciting is when we look at what's happening in the regions with the various more of the mayoral combined authorities and their ability to generate regional funds to support other interventions like pocket parks, rewilding, habitat connectivity, but also cultural amenity. I think what the ambition for the tool we are creating is, because you're looking at all the sites in that holistic way, that you'll be offering a number that are obviously addressing the primary need around housing, but you're also introducing new amenities into that community that they need. So I'm meeting tomorrow a whole range of individuals that represent our cultural part of Bristol in terms of charities that currently occupy council-owned buildings and are delivering, you know, programmes that are delivering huge social impact. They have a massive role to play, and we're meeting with them in order to understand what do we need to incorporate in terms of the parameters and their thinking into the same decision tool. So you're wiring that in. It's not that you're coming in, which we've found, haven't we, that sometimes you have a developer looking at something and going, oh, we don't know what to do with that building, it's expensive to convert, oh, well, that'll be a cultural amenity. It's the wrong mindset. So, yeah.
Great, thanks, Dave. Any other questions? Yes, Nick.
I'm interested, as we saw yesterday, we are in a place where our current government, our new government, is really aligned with this sort of thinking, and previous governments haven't necessarily. How do you see that perhaps what's being proposed through the playbook, what this is looking at, might weather storms of changes in political parties in the future?
I mean, let me just say simply this. I think that whatever political party you represent, the reality is that the economic model for housing delivery is not working. And I know Lord Moylan will have a view, that's fine. But the idea of just leaving this to the market is clearly for the birds, really, isn't it? To be honest. And I think the way that the country invests in social infrastructure is going to be key. To our longer term health outcomes, our productivity, all the things that the sort of hardline capitalists want. What I think the real risk at this particular political moment is if we don't get some of this right, the harder right-wing agenda starts to look like an easier fix, and the sort of the narrative around just reduce the population, the immigration is the problem, and I think that's one of the things that keeps me awake. Is there is a real ideologically driven narrative that could very quickly take root if we can't share there's a way of having a more compassionate, caring society that knows how to look after the most vulnerable. And I think that for me is that if you get that right and you can show economically this works, we can then actually I don't think it matters what political party you're in, because the economics are sound. We've rewired the economics. So.
And I think the other thing is we need to shift the narrative. I think if we start talking about homes for health, we win a lot more acceptance. If we look what happened with Brexit and the referendum with that flipping bus and that message of you save 350 million every week, well, that people bought into that because they really care about the NHS and the health system, actually. And I think we need to really wire that narrative in from a government level now. And then we're going to have something to celebrate because we're going to prove the benefits. We know when we're delivering these homes, they deliver those benefits not only for the residents but for that community. I think that's really fundamentally important, actually, and I think it's a massive opportunity for this government.
So, I'd agree with that. I think it's, I've got a digital background, so I think the process of innovation is the same, whether it's digital or not really. Is that you start with something small, you test it, you iterate, but it's about capturing the value of what you're doing and sharing it. So quite often, there's a huge amount of good work that goes on across the sector. Don't tell anybody about it. So start out on this journey. Let's push this on. Let's demonstrate that it's working. Let's make the case. Let's control the narrative, and then it becomes something that's much more difficult to argue against.
Yeah, great.
Just a couple of days after the election, I saw Polly Dean speak at a conference, Homeless Link conference, and she said, "What's different about this government versus the last government is, you'd sit across the table from someone from the Conservative Party. I can't believe there are people in temporary, they just didn't believe it." And you sit now with someone from Labour, and they yeah, I get it, I know that's the case because that, I was in that. And the challenge that we've got, I think, is even though they understand and there's a bit more empathy for what we're trying to do, we still need to keep communicating. We still need to push them that it's not just about understanding and empathy, it's about, like you say, action and doing it and making those changes.
Yeah, great.
Sorry, just to add to that, I think the thing that will make the case in the long term is the economic benefit.
I think health is a brilliant, health is a brilliant
that,
thing to
that's
push
the thing
on.
that will have the long
Right, one more question, then we must draw to a close. Yes.
Jess, you mentioned in the last session that it's a cultural issue to some extent as well in terms of how we work. On top of that, we've got the fact that it is a wicked problem, so many different components all working together. And then we've got lots of great ideas, some siloed, some more open about what we should be doing, how we should be working. But like you, I think you've got to swing the bat. You've got to start somewhere, see how you progress, measure it, and then move on. What's the next step in doing that? What's the roadmap we have now to say, okay, enough talk, within reason. I'm sure we'll have more summits, but at the same time, along that route, what can we do concretely to move things on?
So look, there is a for the playbook, there is an emerging roadmap in terms of trying to align it with the spending review and then pick 3 or 4 core cities as the pathfinder and then scale it from there. And I think then it's, and what we've done with that is we've looked at the sort of the economic model by aligning some of that TA revenue cost, and so it's a sort of Ardale model, not a so it's revenue investment or capital. I think where we need to then get to, though, the longer roadmap is, and I totally agree with it, is rewiring the way we understand investment through the Treasury, through the Green Book, aligning it with health into social infrastructure is going to be absolutely key. Now, that is a bigger journey, but it started with an industrial strategy, so that the sort of the foundations of some of that work are happening now, hopefully. And, 10-year housing plan, those things are really key. What then matters to me is that as those things come into fruition, we already have some of the mechanisms to deploy. So it doesn't say there's a policy space, and the policy gap means, well, we've got this wonderful policy over here, we don't know how to press a lever to get outcomes. So I think there's a bit of trust in the process right now, isn't there, of how do we do all that we can do within our control, that we can really become mature and take those innovation risks and learn and scale and share, digitise, etc., working with local government, working within that's and knowing that the partnership then through international government is then ready to scale and grow, because we can do it in an iterative process. So that would be my view. I think there's more to do. There's a lot of really good quality thinking and debate happening. I think for me the challenge is how we're doing it in the real world, conceptually and real, not just theoretically. And so joining those up.
And I would say we see a lot of change has been undertaken in the carbon market and climate, and that's needed that significant lift and shift, and is moving forward and is settling down, and we need that same shift. And I think what's really important to note is, Jez has done a great job with Lloyds and LNG around the approach and business case using subsidy loss for temporary accommodation. The next step is we have to start really proving the loss linked to health. So some of you would have heard Dr. William Bird yesterday talking about the adverse childhood experiences that get baked in for children living in really poor homes, in permanent closed homes, threat. They get baked into your life. Those adverse childhood experiences at our adulthood are costing us as a country 43 billion a year. Now that's the number we need to be focusing on. Jess has done a great job getting the subsidy loss over the line, because it's like, this is thinking in a new way.
Well, I can't understand that.
Reconnect health and housing. I'm passionate that we have to reconnect housing with that particular element of the 43 billion a year.
Great. We're going to wrap it up. I'm going to ask to finish each panellist to give me one word of their key word for how we unlock systems innovation. Starting with Sarah, just to be unfair, because you were ready for that.
Oh my God. I would say, one word, what would I say? I'd say collaborate.
Collaborate. Zoe?
Yeah, I would say, it's being open to new ideas and diversity.
Openness. We'll put that on there.
Well, I was going to say partnership, but it feels like
Partnership.
I was going to say open dash partnership.
Okay, and I would say leadership as well. Yeah. It's really getting clear leadership about those outcomes we're trying to fix. Would you join me in thanking my panel? Thank you very much. And look, you know, this is a moment. You know, there is a political window, so please continue to partner, collaborate, be open. Let's get this done together. You know, I'd love to think in 3 years' time we'll look back and go, we really start to get stuff to move in this country again. So thank you all very much.